All right, there we go. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for all being here. We really appreciate you being here for our second to last training session as part of our MBPO Leadership Training Week. This is training number 6 that we've had this week. So I'm seeing some familiar faces, folks that have been on almost every training. So I thank you for being here. Tonight's training is on basic land use and zoning, which is really helpful, I think, for all of our boards because you play such an integral role in land use decisions that happen in our neighborhoods, on our blocks. For introing our presenters, I just want to thank the Borough President for their support in leading these series, as well as our Deputy Borough President, Keisha Sutton-James. I want to thank Porfirio Figueroa from our Community Affairs team, who has every one of these sessions happened because of him. So I just want to thank him for his support in getting these sessions going. And I want to thank Celeste and Madeline, who I'll pass it over to Porfirio in just a moment to introduce. If you don't know me, I'm Eric Cuello. I'm the Director of Community Affairs for the Manhattan Borough President's Office. Again, these sessions are really vital, really important for the work that you do. I also just want to note, Porfirio mentioned before, we do have a Q&A for any questions that you have. We will go to them at the appropriate time. And I also just want to note that all of these recordings are recorded. And if there's something that you want to go back to or review one more time, these will all be up on our YouTube page and really on our website, probably about a week from now. So be sure to look out for that in case there's anything that you want to check out later. With that, I will pass it to Porfirio to do introductions. Porfirio.
Thank you so much, Eric. And happy Halloween, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on this festive evening. I have the great privilege of introducing Madeline McGrory and Celeste Arroyo. My name is Porfirio Figueroa, and I am the Community Coordinator for the Manhattan Borough President's Office. I am also the liaison to Community Boards 11 and 12. So a little bit about Madeline McGrory. She joins the Manhattan Borough President's Office in 2022 as Senior Urban Planner. Prior to the Manhattan Borough President's Office, Madeline was one of the senior policy analysts at a trade organization where her work focused on housing and land use policies, as well as real estate market reports. Madeline holds a master's in urban planning from Columbia University and bachelor's degrees in economics and urban studies from Fordham. Celeste Arroyo is a senior urban planner and has been with the Manhattan Borough President's Office since June. Celeste has that's June of last year, by the way, I should add. Celeste has previously worked in development and adaptive reuse of historic properties and in public and parks. And she holds a master's in city and regional planning from Rutgers University and a bachelor's in urban studies from Vassar College. I turn it over to both of you. Thank you so much for being here and for being part of this session.
Thank you so much, Porfirio, and thanks to everyone who is joining us on Halloween. And in that spirit, why was the skeleton special permit denied?
Why?
Because he had nobody to sign the application. So I hope that brought a smile to some of your faces.
I'm laughing. That's good.
You can blame AI for the Halloween zoning joke. And yeah, let's kick it off. Okay, so this is our agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about the New York City development framework, land use actions, the public review process, other planning tools that are available, challenges that can take place against land use actions, and landmarks. So New York City generally has an as-of-right development framework, which means that most things, about over 90% of things, get built as of right, which means they don't have to go through a land use process or seek a special permit or any approvals. This helps to reduce costs. It's less expensive than going through ULURP. But our office may still track some of these projects. For items that are not as of right, they will go through a land use actions, of which there are many types. At the city level, we have ULURPs, which are mandated by the charter. We also have zoning text amendments, disposition or acquisition of city-owned land. And we'll talk more about ULURPs in a moment. Oh, sorry. We also have zoning text amendments, which are changes to the zoning resolution, which DCP will refer to the community board for review. We have special permits, which are discretionary actions that are subject to ULURP or the Board of Standards Appeals, which typically modify bulk or use or parking regulations. And then the BSA will also grant variances and hear decisions to appeals made by DOB. We also have CPC chair authorizations, which are discretionary actions made by the City Planning Commission, often an informal referral to community boards. We have LPC as well, which we'll talk about more later, which grants buildings or sites landmark or historic district status and regulates them moving forward after their designation. And the Public Design Commission, which has jurisdiction over permanent structures, landscape architecture, and art proposed on or over city-owned property. On the state side, we have general project plans and provisions for other facilities as outlined in state statutes. Provisions of the New York State Urban Development Corporation requires general project plans or GPPs to be implemented through the override of local regulations. And then at the federal level, we have NYCHA Section 18, which is related to the demolition and disposition of public housing with approval by HUD. Today, though, we're going to be talking about ULURP, the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. And there are many actions that you can see here that trigger the ULURP process: rezoning, special permits, many of the ones that I had mentioned earlier. And so diving into the process, step by step, this slide shows the complete process and where community boards fit into that. So the first step for an applicant in the ULURP process is getting certified by the Department of City Planning. That includes submitting a pre-application statement, finalizing the actions that are being requested, determining the reasonable worst-case development scenario, drafting the environmental impact statement, and then finally certification. So within 5 days, DCP will forward the application and the documents to the community board, to our office, to the city council, and the borough board if the project impacts more than one community board. And also, just on the note of borough board, that includes the Manhattan Borough President, who serves as the chair, council members representing the borough, and the chairpersons of all the community boards in the borough. If a project is found to have significant adverse impact, the applicant must hold a public scoping meeting based on the draft scope of work, publish a draft environmental impact statement, hold a public hearing on that, and then publish a final environmental impact statement. In this case, when this transpires, the public also has the opportunity to weigh in during the environmental impact statement process. So after certification, that's where you all come in, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And the community board has several responsibilities in the process, which takes 60 days. And those include notifying the public, holding a public hearing, and submitting a recommendation to the CPC, which will also come to our office and the borough board if necessary. Next, our office enters the picture. After we hear your perspective and recommendations, we will weigh in through our own recommendation to the City Planning Commission, or in some cases may waive the right to do so. We have 30 days to do this. And again, the borough board will write a recommendation at this stage if it is necessary. Then the CPC hosts a hearing on the project where they will approve, modify, or disapprove the application. So at this stage, things are no longer a recommendation. If the CPC disapproves the project, it's final, except if it's a zoning map change, special permit, and urban renewal plans. And the CPC has 60 days to do this. Then the city council will automatically review something if it is a zoning map change, a non-ULURP text change, housing and urban renewal plan, disposition of residential building, 197A plan, or a triple no scenario. And they may elect to review for other items, including special permits, landfills, and some other things. If the city council makes modifications, the CPC gets 15 more days to review that. And if the city council doesn't act, then the CPC decision is final. And then finally, the mayor can veto within 15 days. If the mayor vetoes it, then the city council can overturn it with a 2/3 majority within 10 days of that veto. If an application is withdrawn, it is usually at the council stage before the council votes. And if they want to continue to pursue ULURP and maybe they want to change their application to reflect any modifications, then they'll have to restart ULURP. Zoning text amendments are also similar to the ULURP process. However, the community board and the borough president timelines are combined with 30 to 60 days to review. And that the decision about the timeline is made by Department of City Planning staff, and the City Planning Commission gets unlimited time to review.
All right. So there are different numbers of tools that can be used for evaluating land use proposals. One of them is the zoning application portal, which is where the information on all the applications is formally submitted. So within the zoning application portal, there's a land use package, which has the project description, which includes background information on the project, neighborhood context, and identifies the zoning actions that are being taken. There would also be a zoning map, a tax map, and an area map to provide further context. It will also include environmental assessment documents, which additionally include a project description, descriptions of the existing conditions, and the surrounding area, as well as analysis of potential impacts on the environment, which includes everything from air quality to shadows. Certain applications also have a racial impact study, which looks at the area's racial, ethnic, and income level demographics, analyzes housing security, neighborhood affordability, and other factors. And this comes from 2021 legislation that applies to certain zoning map and text changes, special permits, city housing actions, site selection, et cetera. If certain conditions are met related to the size of the project, including square footage and number of community districts affected. And it's also helpful for providing additional context when analyzing an application and what the potential impacts to the area could be. So there's also the city zoning resolution, which is available online. So you can read a section of the zoning resolution that's relevant to the application that you can find in the project description. And you can see the findings that must be met in order for an application to be approved. So you can also look at ZOLA, which is the city planning tool that shows you the zoning of an area or address, tells you the permitted uses of that district, as well as the density, floor area ratio, and if the lot is in a special or historic district, details about the size of a lot, the ownership of a lot, et cetera. And you can see here on ZOLA, it shows you the different colors of the different zoning districts, where yellow is residential, red is commercial, and purple is manufacturing, as well as, you know, the areas with commercial overlays. So if you haven't taken a look at ZOLA, highly recommend, and we'll include links to all these resources as well. So the SEQR process, or City Environmental Quality Review, is a comprehensive process that goes through 19 different sections of environmental impact, and is how city agencies determine what effect an action may have on the environment. It's not an approval process, but a disclosure process. And if figuring out if an action is subject to SEQR, we ask, does the project need discretionary approvals or permits from any city agency? Does the project need city funding? is the project being directly undertaken by a city agency? And if it does, the project will need to undergo seeker. So there are other tools that can be used to kind of create greater scale plans. One of them is 197A plans, which are a section of the city charter and can be sponsored by community boards, DCP, borough presidents, and other city agencies. They need to be approved by the CPC and adopted by the council, and are meant to guide city agencies with kind of an overall vision for an area or to address a specific issue. Examples of those over the years have been the CB6 Eastern section in 2010, West Chelsea in 1996, Hamilton Heights, Manhattanville, Morningside Heights in 2007. And those plans can be called back on in future actions for reference to community priorities and, you know, kind of what the priorities were at that point in time. Large scale developments can be, you know, larger general zoning lots or residential developments on larger zoning lots. Hospitals as well are often included in this category. And CPC can modify the underlying zoning district rules on these sites to allow for greater flexibility of bulk and open space within this larger scale development project. Urban renewal laws as well are not as relevant today, but they authorize the city to acquire property and then dispose of it for redevelopment in accordance with the requirements of the plan. So it's also possible to bring challenges to zoning actions and developments through various administrative avenues, like through the DOB. And types of challenges can include zoning challenge and appeal, an Article 78 lawsuit, which appeals agency decisions at the state or local level, zoning text amendments, and various agency directives. You know, these often happen on a case-by-case basis, but it's, you know, something we do see in the land use world. So landmarks, as Madeline mentioned earlier, the Landmarks Preservation Commission has the power to designate landmarks and historic districts. This often happens via requests for evaluation, where when you identify a site that meets the criteria for evaluation, which is available online, you can download a request for evaluation form and submit it to the LPC. They evaluate the requests for evaluations, and where they see potential merit, they allocate their resources, you know, as if they align with the agency's goals. LPC also oversees alterations to landmark properties, as well as properties in historic districts, via staff approval or commission vote. And as you all know, these applications will come through the community board as well. And the LPC hearings are also available to watch on YouTube as well. And you can, you know, learn a lot for how they think through various applications. Landmark properties and districts are also granted some zoning relief. So these are the resources we discussed. I'll also try to drop them in the chat. But, you know, especially if you're newer to a community board or just want to refresh yourself on some of these tools, you know, highly recommend going through them and seeing what you learn about your neighborhood or other projects that you might be interested in. And yeah, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. We're always available, you know, beyond the scope of this presentation. But for now, we're happy to take any questions you have about this presentation or anything else land use related, and happy Halloween.
Great, thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? If so, please put them in the Q&A function.
I often get one question when new community board members come on the board and they're assigned perhaps to a land use committee. And the question is typically, like, what is the difference between a development that needs to go into ULURP and one that is as of right? And often that causes confusion when there are new members. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, sure. Happy to elaborate. So the the ULURPs are specific to, this would be a long list, but the main ones that we see are rezonings, special permits, acquisition or disposition of city property, city map changes, zoning map changes. Those are the major ones that we see. So if a building or a development is compatible with the zoning that's applicable in that district, so it fits within the bulk regulations and the height regulations and the floor area ratio that is described in the zoning district it falls within, then it will not go through the ULURP process.
Yeah, just kind of taking a step back, more generally, zoning defines what you like can and can't do in a specific area. So, for example, if an area is zoned manufacturing, there are regulations in the zoning resolution that define manufacturing districts as somewhere where you cannot build residential development. So if I was a developer and I owned property in a manufacturing district, I could not build a residential building there. So in that case, I would have to go through a land use process, likely a rezoning to rezone for residential. I would have to have a, salient argument for why that was an appropriate use in that area. And then it would go through the whole land use and community board review process. And as Madeline mentioned, that can be, something related to the height and bulk of the building as well. If I was in a residential district that only allowed me to build up to a certain height or a certain, bulk of building or floor area ratio. And, for my project to be successful or for what I wanted to do, I wanted to be able to build higher or build more. I would have to go through a land use process to allow that to happen. So it's just, expanding the land use process is a process of, expanding the scope of what can happen at a certain site if the existing zoning doesn't allow that to happen.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful. We have another question. Someone asked, if a property has landmark status, does that mean they cannot alter the inside of the property or the facade?
So there are a number of different types of landmarks. There are individual landmarks, which pertains to the exterior of individual structures. Then there are interior landmarks that they're customarily open to the public. There are scenic landmarks and historic districts. So it does depend on the type of landmark, whether or not the interior is considered when any alterations or modifications are being proposed.
Thank you. And we have another question. I think it's about overlay. So how does zoning work when it comes to mixed use land, like primary residential building with a commercial storefront?
Yeah, for sure. So certain zoning districts have I'll kind of differentiate the two. There's mixed use districts, which I can get into in a second. But then the residential districts with commercial overlays is usually along, in Manhattan, it's usually along the avenues or larger streets, like the bigger cross streets. And it is, exactly what you described, Eric, where it's usually a residential building with a commercial storefront on the ground floor. And those commercial overlays are usually C1 and C2 districts, which are neighborhood commercial districts, and allow for basically neighborhood commercial uses. So pharmacies, grocery stores, anything that would be kind of compatible with, residential use, so that people have stores they can go to and, can take care of their daily needs within their neighborhoods. And again, those are typically mapped on streets that are wider and appropriate for commercial use. So, if you think about your neighborhoods and the smaller side streets that don't have ground floor retail, those do not have commercial overlays. But if you think about, for example, a major avenue that has all that ground floor retail, that would be a commercial overlay. Mixed use districts are a little more specific, and that those will have more specific regulations according to that special district. So, that has different definitions for how those uses can be mixed. But yeah, that answers that question, I hope.
Yeah, definitely does. Not seeing anything else, I just want to note, somebody said that this is a terrific webinar, so thank you for the presentation. And I think if there aren't any other questions, we'll just close it out pretty soon. I just want to say thank you again for the presentation. I know that this is really helpful. Folks got a lot out of this. I think David had a question as to where this presentation be available online. Yes, we will share it on our website about a week from now, so please stay tuned and you will see it on there. But I think with that, unless I see anything else, oh, I see someone says that they have a question. Just give me one moment. Someone was asking about a brief overview about New York City zoning. I'm not sure how that may be a little longer than a brief response, but they also had a question about contextual zoning differing from height factor zoning.
Okay, overview of New York City zoning. I'll maybe touch on that briefly, and then if Madeline, you want to follow up on that one. But I would say, like I mentioned before, New York City zoning is, pretty much broken down into three major categories: residential, commercial, manufacturing, and then lots of different variations within that. The zoning resolution is a lot to sort through if you're not looking for a specific topic, but I would recommend the zoning and land use map to kind of click through and look at all the different districts and like what is mapped where, if that is helpful. In terms of contextual versus height factor, so height factor zoning was something that was very popular in New York in the early to mid to slightly later 1900s, and it defined the style of building that we see a lot, the kind of, towers straight up with potentially some open space around it. And that, is not defined by height limits. There's like a ratio process that goes into how much open space compared to how tall the building can go. Whereas contextual zoning is meant to be more, quote, contextual with the area around it. It doesn't have the kind of open space requirement around it, but it does mean that buildings can take up more of the lot that they're on and therefore be shorter and bulkier buildings. It's a building form that, has existed in New York City for a while. We kind of moved away from building that way, and now there's been a movement citywide to kind of go back to that, to kind of build shorter buildings that are contextual with the neighborhoods that they're in, according to the zoning, and not have the tall towers that have defined New York City and have been important sources of housing and office space and all of that over the years. But there's, in my opinion, kind of importance in having varied building form and having the flexibility to not just be constrained into, one or the other, and have flexibility in, the different building forms that can be made more difficult to build by our zoning. And I think we're now trying to increase the ability to build in a more contextual way in the city if we choose to do so. Madeline, any follow-up to that?
I guess a bit more about the history and when NYC first established zoning, that was in 1916 in response to tall office buildings being built and concerns about light and air requirements. And then in 1961, there was another major overhaul as well of the zoning resolution.
Thank you both. And actually, Madeleine, you just answered part of a question that was asked by someone actually. So thank you for that historical reference. That really was helpful. So I do have a question here, and I don't know if Eric could address this one. But who produces the environmental impact study for any given development? How is that done?
Yeah, so the applicant will develop the environmental impact study, and there's like a rubric that and different metrics that are defined that the applicant will have to follow and do things like collect demographic data about an area, information about the businesses, the surrounding zoning districts, the history, the area context that are all included. And it's very much regimented and outlined and predictable between environmental impact statements.
I presume the same factors would align with doing a racial impact study.
Yeah, so there's a equitable development data tool that you can also take a look at online, and yeah, it's very similar in terms of it's mandated exactly what is being looked at by the applicant.
And perhaps can you flesh out a little bit or give an example perhaps on what the reasonable worst case development scenarios like what that could possibly be, like how are those determined?
Yeah, for sure. So for the reasonable worst case development scenario, that's part of the environmental impact study. And it I don't have the most like technical language for it, but in the general sense, it's what is the most that can be built on that site, not in general, not like maxing out the zoning itself, but maxing out the potential for that project. So like within the realm of what is being proposed for the project, what is like the most that could be built, or the most impact that it could have. And then that's what's looked at in the environmental impact. So it's not necessarily saying this is your proposal, this is what the impact is. It's saying what is the maximum that your specific proposal could be and looking at the impact of that. So trying to capture like, eventualities that might not be what the actual proposal ends up being, but trying to like capture some of that potential excess impact.
And I believe you alluded to this earlier, but what would you say has been the biggest rezoning resolution or contextual zoning changes in recent history?
I mean, that's, a little bit of a tough question to answer. I know, we're probably all aware of City of Yes, which is one of the biggest changes to our zoning text that is being proposed. I will say it's not doing anything to impact the actual zoning map of our city. So like where, the different zones are going. But, it is a significant change to our zoning text, which hasn't happened since 1961, as Madeline mentioned. And then in terms of actual like rezonings and change to our city's zoning map, there have been a couple of area-wide neighborhood rezonings that have happened over the last few decades, including, Soho, NoHo, East Harlem. We've got Midtown South mixed use that is going to be happening, upcoming. So yeah, I would say those would be the ones that come to mind.
Terrific. I believe that covers all the questions that I've seen so far. I don't know if Eric's still here, but on behalf of the office, this is our land use team, everyone, and they do a phenomenal job. Celeste, Madeleine, we are so happy and privileged to have you on our team. Again, on behalf of the Manhattan Borough President, Mark Levine, on behalf of our Deputy Keisha Sutton James, on behalf of our Director of Community Affairs, Eric Cuello, let me mention Dawn, who is our support staff, who is also instrumental in helping with this, and our CAU staff. We thank you both, the land use team, and we thank the rest of you also for joining us on this Halloween evening. Again, this will live on our YouTube channel, so you can refer to it in the future. By the way, we will have an addition to our series, which will be on November 18th. And we will be talking about what it is like to, or what are the tools one can use to pass on institutional knowledge. Celeste, Madeleine, thank you again. To everyone who's out there, have a great, great evening. Be well. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.